Now, every word of the Bible is inspired. Every word of the Bible is true. However, at the same time, where there is repetitive things, where the same thing is being said over, that should also turn our heads a little bit and pique special interest. Now, it does not mean that it is more true than other parts of the Bible. All the Bible's true. It's all fully inspired by God. By the way, even the lies in the Bible, did you know how there are lies in the Bible? But the lies are recorded accurately. So the Bible does not lie to us. You get that? The Bible tells us of lies people told. So that could be said it's a lie in the Bible, but the Bible does not lie to us. It tells us the truth about a lie. We all been there. You lied. Yeah, this is what they said. You're telling the truth. But you're telling the truth about someone else's lie. So all the Bible is inspired. All of the Bible is true. However, this passage is unique because there are 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, okay? Of the 4 Gospels, there are only 2 miracles that are reported in all 4 Gospels. They all tell the same story of Jesus. They all look at him from a different point of view and tell us something different about Jesus from a different point of view. The first miracle that's in all 4 of the Gospels is the resurrection of Jesus Christ, okay? Just past Easter not too long ago, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is in all 4. The other miracle that's in all 4 Gospels is this one today, where Jesus feeds 5,000. So you can go to Mark, we're in Mark. You can go to Matthew, you can go to Luke, you can go to John, and you can read their account. And you know what you're going to get? You're going to get a different variation of the same story, and it's all true. One of the stories is not wrong and one of them's right. No. They're all true. But it's recorded 4 times because each human author, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, has different lessons that God wants us to draw from it. So when we teach on this, on the feeding of the 5,000 today from Mark, it's going to be a little bit different from John's account in John chapter 6. It's going to be a little different in Matthew's account. You may be a little bit different in Luke's account. But you know what account we're going to look at today? Mark's. So let's look at Mark's account in Mark chapter 6. This is right after Jesus sends the disciples away, gives them power over unclean spirits and to do all kinds of miracles. They go and do it. They go tell everybody about Jesus. They come back and say, that was awesome. There's a lot of people that believed in you, Jesus. But you know what? We're tired. I don't even remember last time I ate. Jesus said, let's go, get in the ship. We're going to go to a desolate place. You guys need a little R&R, a little rest and relaxation. Jesus booked them a cruise, and they were going across the Sea of Galilee, likely to a desolate place. All right? Verse 32 of chapter 6. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Their vacation was spoiled. Verse 34. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. That's talking about Jesus, Jesus saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. That's the center of this whole Mark's account. Jesus went to shore. He saw all the crowds. He had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. We're going to come back to what that means, but let's keep reading. What did Jesus do? And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. In other words, they were remembering what Jesus said. Jesus, hang on. You said that we told you we didn't even have time to eat. We went on the boat. We're on the other side. And now you're teaching. We're still hungry. We haven't eaten. And you know what? Everyone else is hungry too. Dismiss the crowd. We're still looking forward to that meal. They were hungry. Verse 37, but he, Jesus, answered them, the disciples. He looked at the disciples and said, you give them something to eat. That's a rebuke and a correction to there. Very important there. You give them something to eat. The disciples were saying, okay, send them into the towns. By the way, there's no towns near. It's a desolate place. Yeah, McDonald's is open. It's about 20 miles that way. You're dismissed for dinner. Who wants to make that announcement? No one. No one. Everyone's looking at each other. We don't have any food. The nearest McDonald's is far away, right? They're in a desolate place. And the disciples are saying, send them away. Exact opposite from what Jesus' response was. Jesus' response was, he looked at them and had compassion. The disciples are saying, we're hungry, they're hungry, everyone's hungry. Everyone's thinking about the Big Mac or whatever. Send them away. Exact opposite reaction as Jesus had. And Jesus said, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them to eat? That's about 200 days' wages in that time. The amount of people that were there, it would have going to cost that much to feed everybody. 200 days worth of wages. And Jesus said to him, how many loaves do you have? Once again, Jesus is being very pointed here. The disciples are like, yep, we're still looking forward to the meal. That's good teaching, Jesus. You know what? We're hungry. Everyone else is hungry. Send them away. And Jesus is saying, what is the first thing he said to him? He said, you give them something to eat. They don't have to go anywhere. Well, we can, but we need all the money to buy the food. How many loaves do you have? They feel targeted. Well, we haven't even had time to eat. We haven't eaten yet. We're hungry. And now you're after the little food that I have. They're like protecting, You ever been protective over your food? That's what they were. And Jesus is really probing them. How many loaves do you have? Me. Well, what do they say? Their eyes are as big as quarters right now. Verse 38. How many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And then he commanded them to all sit down in groups by the green grass. And they sat down in groups by the hundreds and by the 50s. And taking 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves. And now catch this, gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all, and they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Now, when it says 5,000 men, it is not saying 5,000 people. There's a word for people or man or mankind. It's the word anthropos. That's not the word used here. The word used is an adult male. It's only the men. So that means there were women and children present also. Okay? So that means that this crowd he did not feed a crowd of 5,000. He fed a crowd of 5,000 men, which can eat as much as about 20,000 women. Plus there was women there and children. This crowd was huge that he fed. Jesus fed with 5 loaves and 2 fish. But Jesus didn't do it alone. He purposefully involved the disciples. They said, well, we need to come up with money and send everybody to the store then. How many loaves do you have? He said. 5 and 2 fish. Jesus took them. He blessed them. And then what did he do? He gave them back to the disciples and said, you guys give it out. Jesus included the disciples in the miracle. Jesus could have fed everybody. All right, everybody bow your heads to pray. All right, now everybody, amen. Boom, the food's magically in front of them. Jesus could have did that. He's God. He could have fed them all without the disciples. Yet he chose to use the disciples. Very important in verse 41. He gave them to the disciples to set before the people. So that's the first scene in this passage. That's the main story. There's two other passages that go along with this. We already know right now the disciples are on one page. Jesus is on another page. Jesus is motivated by compassion. The disciples are only want what is convenient. They just want what is convenient. They are not motivated by compassion. Look at the next miracle right here, verse 45. And immediately after the miracle, he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida. And he dismissed the crowd. And after they'd taken leave of him, he went up into a mountain to pray. So what happened after the meal? Jesus went up into a mountain to pray. He says, all right, crowd, now you're not going away hungry. You don't need McDonald's to be open. Everyone's dismissed. Lesson time over. Disciples, you guys still need some rest. Why don't you guys go back into the boat and just go out to the sea, enjoy your little cruise. And meanwhile, I'm going to go up into the mountain to pray. That's what's happening right now. And when evening came, verse 47, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. Jesus was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, that's between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., that's in the middle of the night. The fourth watch of the night, so it's complete darkness at that point. He came to them walking on the sea. Now, a friend of mine has a swimming pool, and when I got into reading the Bible and close to the Lord, when I was about 20-something years old, in my early 20s, I've tried walking on water many times. I can't. I sink like a brick. Anyone else ever actually tried walking on water for fun? I mean, it's fun. You should try it sometime. But Jesus did it. Now, there are skeptics of the Bible who try to explain this part away. They try to say, well, he was walking on a sandbar that was underneath the waves, so he was walking on land right there. That's not what it says. Other skeptics and just people that try to reject the Bible try to say, well, if you're ever on the sea, you notice there's a reflection of the land. And Jesus was walking on the land, and they saw Jesus' reflection, and it looked like he was walking on the water. But yet the word for walking on the water literally means on top of. It means on top of. Jesus was doing something miraculous. He was walking on the water, not on the land next to the water, not on a sandbar in the water. He was walking on the water. Amazing. If you were in a boat on a sea between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. in complete darkness, and you saw somebody, you didn't know who it was, walking on the water towards you, what would your reaction be? What would your reaction be? I mean, think of it. These were real people in the boat, and they saw some person between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. in the middle of the night walking on the water towards them. What do you think they did? They flipped out. They didn't know what was going on. They flipped out. Look, verse 49. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost. And they cried out, and all the people saw him and were terrified. They woke everybody up. The watchmen woke everyone up. Probably in terror and scream. They all flipped out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, and he said 3 words. Take heart. That means have courage. It is I. It's interesting. That's in Greek, and the Old Testament was in Hebrew, written in Hebrew, but it's literally the same lingo when Moses was asking God, what is your name? And God says, I am. Literally, it's the same language there, the same terms in a different language. When Jesus says, it is I. He says, take heart. It is I, or I am. Then he says, do not be afraid. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded. Now look at verse 52. For they did not understand about the loaves, and their hearts were hardened. That's how we know we need to treat these 2 stories together. These 2 stories are not separate, they're connected. For they did not understand about the loaves, and their hearts were hardened. They knew Jesus could do some awesome stuff, but the disciples were still getting to know Jesus themselves. Their hearts were hardened. They already dropped the ball on the loaves there. Jesus covered for them. They cried out there. The disciples are still on a different wavelength as Jesus. Jesus had to remind them, have courage. It's me. I am. Don't be afraid. So how do these two passages work together? They show the hardness of the hearts of, now we're used to seeing the hardness of hearts of people like the Pharisees. This verse shows the hardness of hearts of the disciples towards Jesus. Amazing. Amazing. They didn't understand about the loaves. What does this passage mean for us today? Well, it means one word: compassion. Compassion. Compassion is the difference between Jesus and the disciples in all of this passage. You see, what does this mean for us today? The entire reason why Jesus taught everybody and fed them was because Jesus had compassion on them. And like Jesus, you and I, if I can say we, should meet the needs of others with compassion. Now, that leads to the question, great, what are the needs of others? What does that mean? It's easy to say, with compassion, we need to meet people's needs. That's a good thing. But what does that look like, right? What does that look like to meet people's needs with compassion? Mark shows us exactly what Jesus did. Look at verse 34 of Mark 6. When he went ashore, Jesus saw a great crowd. He had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. What does that mean? They had nobody to feed them. Now, that was not talking about physical food. It's talking about spiritual. And he began to teach them many things. And then look at the beginning of verse 35. When it grew late. So Jesus' first reaction to these people was not to meet their physical needs, although he did that. Jesus' first reaction and compassion was to meet their spiritual needs, you see. Jesus said he had compassion on them, and the first thing that he needed to do, first, I want to tell you all about myself. He sat down, probably had everybody else stand up. It was opposite. Now we have listeners sit down typically, and the speaker stand up. In this day, there was people standing up to listen, and the teacher was sitting down. He probably had everybody said, stand up, I'm going to start teaching you. The only reason why Jesus actually fed everybody was because it grew so late because of all the teaching. And yet, when we read this story in Mark, we want to always think, we have a tendency to think, oh, it's all about the feeding of the 5,000. Actually, no. It's actually about Jesus' compassion and burden and teaching everybody about himself. That's the greater need in this passage. It's not about the actual feeding, even though that gets more content. The only reason why they even had to have a meal was because Jesus was teaching them so much about himself. So Jesus recognized that the first need he and we and all of us today need to meet in other people's lives is not necessarily to open our wallet or to buy somebody something or to help them out with a project. The biggest need people have is their need of Jesus. Is their need of Jesus. Which begs the question, which one is our compassion attached to? Which stirs up compassion for you? If you hear somebody without a meal and that's literally going hungry and doesn't have anything to eat, or somebody without Jesus? Where is our compassion? Now, there should be in both. The answer is not one or the other, it's both, right? But the Mark says that the way it's written in the Gospel of Mark, the other Gospels include Jesus doing miracles. There's other lessons to be drawn from that too. But the emphasis in the book of Mark is on the teaching. As the time passed by, then everyone got hungry. They had to address the food situation. you see. The number one emphasis of this passage is the compassion Jesus Christ has on the care for people's state of eternity and their spiritual health. That kind of compassion. Teaching was the priority for Jesus. Feeding was only necessary because of all of the teaching Jesus was doing. Now, that's not to dismiss humanitarian efforts. Those are important. After all, he did end up feeding everybody as well. Beats the apostles' plan. Send everyone away. We only have a few, and this food's ours for ourselves. Jesus said, no, we're going to feed everyone too. So it's not a one or the other. It's a both and. But one is temporary and one is eternal, and which one should be the priority? You see, the main ministry of Jesus was teaching the truth about himself. And the same is true for the New Testament church today. Today. The main ministry of every church is spiritual edification and helping people that are far from God to come close to God. That's the main ministry of church. The way we say it around here is to make disciples. That's a passionate follower of Jesus. To make disciple makers. That means after you become a passionate follower of Jesus, we want to train you to help others become passionate followers of Jesus. There's a cycle to it, right? And the main ministry of the church is to teach people about Jesus. Is to teach people about Jesus. Is that what draws the most compassion in your life? Seeing sheep without a shepherd? Seeing people not in church? Seeing people without Jesus? What draws the most compassion in you? The example of Jesus is in stark contrast with the example of the disciples. Verse 34, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. So you and I today should meet people's spiritual need. In fact, the church is commissioned to do just that. There are 1,000 other organizations that help with physical needs, and we partner with many local organizations that help people with physical needs. We partner with them and we support some local organizations that do just that. And we also have a benevolence team here that does meet needs. And we have a process for it. But the church is the only institution, listen here, the church is the only institution in the world that is founded by God with a specific purpose of telling people about Jesus Christ. That must be the priority in the church. Now, many other organizations are founded by man to tell people about Jesus. There's nothing wrong with those. But Jesus Christ founded the church. In fact, in 1 Timothy 3:15, Paul says to Timothy, if I delay, that you should know how to behave yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. You see, the number one ministry Paul was telling Timothy, a young pastor at Ephesus in 1 Timothy. Timothy, the main ministry of the church is to tell people about Jesus and help people that are far from God to come close and do exactly what Jesus is doing in Mark chapter 6 and began to teach them many things. Not just knowledge and facts, but things that will change their life. So you and I, like Jesus, should be moved with compassion on people that do not have a shepherd, that are sheep without a shepherd. Unchurched believers, unchurched unbelievers, people that do not know Jesus. And that should move us to compassion to teach them many things. Does that sound intimidating to you? Talking to somebody about Jesus and telling them all about Jesus? You may think, I don't know much. I can promise you this. You probably know 10 times more than your average person on the street, so you don't need to be ashamed to tell anybody about Jesus. You are equipped to tell people about Jesus. At the same time, we also can't deny the fact that Jesus did also meet this physical need. The emphasis is on the spiritual need, but Jesus did also meet physical needs. Furthermore, we're at such a time in society where in order to be loving, people respond when they also get physical compassion. People want to be helped practically, physically, and not just practically, spiritually. What I'm trying to say this morning is that if we are to be followers of Jesus Christ, we also need to be moved with compassion as we seek to live for the Lord. We cannot forget that is that one characteristic that separates Jesus and his disciples is compassion. Compassion. I know everyone's tired. We didn't get to our cruise destination. We were going to go to a desolate. I keep saying cruise. They went on the cruise on the ship, but here's the thing. The ship wasn't the goal. Jesus actually told the disciples, come with me on the ship, and we're going to go to a desolate place. Well, guess what? The place they went to was desolate of resources, but it wasn't desolate of people because there was crowds waiting there for them. In other words, they never got the rest that they were supposed to get. The disciples were still hungry. They didn't eat. But Jesus was moved with compassion in a way that was sacrificial, met their spiritual needs, met their physical needs. What does this mean? It means that you and I should not seek to help others out of our abundance, but from our own conviction and compassion inside of us. You see, the disciples did not have an abundance of loaves. They had 5. The disciples did not have an abundance of fish. They had 2. If your helping others is only limited to your abundance, you lack compassion. And it will lack the miracle and the working of God that we see in this passage. That multiplication of loaves, that multiplication of fish, that fed everybody. And Jesus did a whole lot more with less when there's compassion involved. A whole lot more. Jesus can do more with less when you add compassion. The disciples were going to be like, all right, this meeting's adjourned. Everyone's on your own for dinner. Nobody wanted to make that announcement. And by the way, they had Jesus right there. That's so cringe. That is very cringe of them to be like, what are we going to do? We got nothing. I mean, we got 5 loaves, 2 fish, but people don't know that. Be quiet. Hide it. And we got Jesus here, but as soon as he's done teaching, what are we going to do? The disciples tried to dodge the bullet. You give them something to eat. I don't have much. 5 loaves, 2 fishes? You give them something to eat? How many loaves do you have? Jesus was not letting the disciples off the hook. He was saying, by the way, Jesus knew how many loaves they had. He knows everything. He knows everything. It wasn't about trying to tally it up. Jesus was asking that and chasing them to stir their compassion to say, Jesus, what little I have, use it. Jesus, I don't want to hoard things to myself. Jesus, you can do more with this little that I have than I can. That's what he was trying to tell them. That's why Jesus chased them a little bit. You give them something to eat. How many loaves do you have? Go and see. He wanted an answer. Oh, I don't know, just a little. Go and see. Give me a number, Jesus was saying. Found out 5 and 2 fish. If your ministry to others is only out of convenience, then it's likely we're making little impact in the lives of others like the disciples. But if your ministry to others is out of compassion and out of conviction, God will do great things in your life and through you. God will do great things through you when you are moved with compassion. When you emulate and replicate and duplicate, and all the other Kates, the Christ-like love and compassion and heart for people that Jesus has. And not like the disciples. Send them away. We have our food. I thought the church was going to pay for that. I didn't know we had to pay anything. Jesus used the disciples to distribute the bread. Jesus was teaching this lesson to the disciples, saying, listen, I know you only have 5 loaves. I know you only have 2 fish. I asked you that number because I wanted you to go get them and count them up and realize it. And now I want you to break up what little you have and give it to others. Jesus, we're hungry too. I don't know if you remember, we just came back from that mission. We didn't even have time to eat. You will. And you know how many baskets full were left? 12. Well, there was 12 disciples. That was the lesson for the disciples. Remember that 5 loaves and 2 fish? Not only did you eat as much as you wanted there, but you each have a whole basket full now. Wow. Jesus will do more with less when we are moved with compassion inside of us. The disciples see the problem in this passage, but they propose an inadequate solution. Let's go buy food. Jesus was basically asking the disciples here, do you have compassion on them? And do you believe what I can do? Verse 53 is the actual end cap of this. Verse 53 through 56, look. When they crossed over, after he fed everyone, he put the disciples on the boat, he walked out to them, and then, verse 53, when they crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored at the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region to bring the sick people on their beds and to wherever they heard he was. And whenever he came, in villages, in cities, in countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch him and even touch the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were healed. Sounds to me like even the crowds know a lot more and believe a lot more about Jesus than the disciples do at this point. You see, the disciples are still a work in progress. That's put there on the end to show that the disciples were not moved with compassion and didn't realize that they didn't depend on Jesus for the results of their ministry and their life in this case. And you have all these other people that believe Jesus can do anything and bringing all these sick people and seeing great things done. Why were those crowds bringing sick people? Compassion. Compassion. That's how. I don't know if I've told this story before, but it keeps on coming back to me. So if you heard it before, I hope you'll forgive me. In 2006 was the year I got right with the Lord. I was living far away from God. I was far from God. I was partying on the weekends. I was doing all kinds of things I shouldn't have been doing. 2006, God opened my eyes. I got right with him. Ever since then, I had the desire to go off to Bible college and had no clue how I was going to pay for college. That's kind of the big thing. I was 23 years old, and I was sitting on my sister's porch swing at Lisa's house, at her house, and we were just talking, and I was like, yeah, I'm starting to save up for college, working my job, and my niece, Jules, was about 5 years old at the time. She was sitting on her lap, and she heard us talking. It was just adult talk. It was nothing important for a kid. She was probably bored. She went inside a little bit after that, and I was like, okay, well, she was probably bored. And we were talking about, maybe in a couple of years I can go once I get enough money saved up for it and stuff like that. And I was living on my own, 23, 2 years old, 21 years old, living on my own. My little niece, 5 or 6 years old, Jules, comes back out about 5 minutes later with a Ziploc bag full of change. She said, here you go, Uncle Eric. This is for you, for college. And she went into her piggy bank and gave me every penny she had. Everything. And I counted it up, and you know how much money it was? $1.97. Yes, I still remember. I'll never forget. 2 years later, I saved up money, had a good down payment for my for my Bible college, registered for my classes, moved to California, went up to that counter. It was time at the end of the registration week. It's time to pay the bill. I didn't know who this lady was. Quite frankly, it didn't really matter. She was hearing the story. And she heard the story. And I pulled out that same thing and put the first $1.97 on my school bill from my niece. $1.97, what's that going to do? It's not very practical. But it was compassionate. And that $1.97 is worth more to me than someone else saying, I would have paid for the whole 4 years. No thanks. I'll take that $1.97 anytime. Jesus can do more with less when we are moved with compassion. So who have you thought of during this time that you may need to be moved with compassion to meet a need, whether it's spiritual or physical?